From the outside, we probably seemed like the ideal couple. I'm the type of guy who likes everything in order, routines, discipline, predictability, and I've never been one to waste time on unnecessary emotions. I'm driven by work, and I run my life based on logic and reason, expecting the same from everyone around me, especially my wife. At first glance, you'd probably wonder how we even got together. She was more social, spontaneous, and didn't care much for the rules I lived by. She thrived on chaos and unpredictability. Yet, despite these differences, we had a lot in common where it mattered. Both of us were intensely focused on our careers. We didn't get bogged down with the kind of romantic nonsense that I always found impractical. She respected that. We worked well together, or so I thought at the time. What really attracted me to her was that she wasn't clingy. She had her own life, her own ambitions, and she didn't expect me to constantly shower her with affection. We respected each other's space, and that balance worked perfectly for us. It felt like we had a mutual understanding. We didn't need to be the couple who spent every waking moment together, and we were fine with that. But, looking back now, I realize how blind I was to the small things. There was always something about her independence that I admired, and I never questioned her loyalty because I didn't think I had to. We had set boundaries, and I thought those boundaries were solid. I figured, as long as we stuck to the plan, everything would be fine. It was all about keeping things practical and uncomplicated. But as I've come to learn, just because something seems solid on the surface doesn't mean it actually is. Before I dive any further into this, there's something important that I need to mention. It's a decision I made years ago that seemed insignificant at the time, but it ended up playing a huge role in what came next. You see, I got a vasectomy. I never wanted kids. To be honest, the idea of raising children never appealed to me. I was always too focused on my career, and I didn't have the patience or desire for a family. My wife, Anna, well, at least she used to be on the same page. She didn't want kids either, or that's what she said. We had that conversation early in our relationship, and she seemed relieved when I brought it up. She wasn't the type to fantasize about motherhood. Like me, she was deeply committed to her career and didn't want anything to get in the way. So, when I got the vasectomy, it felt like a no-brainer. No kids, no complications, just two people living the lives they'd planned. It simplified things for us. No more worrying about accidents, no surprises. We could focus on what we cared about: work, ambition, and keeping life on track. At the time, I thought I had made the perfect decision. It made sense, and it felt like a logical step to ensure that our lives stayed exactly how we wanted them, simple and straightforward. We didn't talk about kids after that. We didn't need to. Our routines stayed the same, and we moved on like nothing had changed. I didn't realize how much that one small decision was going to come back and haunt me later. Our lives settled into a routine that suited both of us. I worked from home, being in IT, and she had her demanding career that often kept her at the office late. We didn't need much more than that, a simple, predictable life. Or at least, I didn't. I assumed she felt the same way. There was one more thing I should probably mention. After I got the vasectomy, we stopped using condoms. It just didn't seem necessary anymore. No pregnancy worries, no added stress. For us, it felt like another layer of convenience, something that set our relationship apart from others. And honestly, it made everything more intimate. Without condoms, it felt different, more real, more connected. We both enjoyed that extra closeness, and it became just another part of our routine. After a while, we didn't even think about it anymore. It was just how things were between us. Years passed, and life continued on without any real surprises. We were both busy with work, and our routines remained the same. But looking back, I now see that I missed a lot of small changes, little shifts in her behavior that, at the time, I brushed off. When you live with someone for years, you get used to their patterns, and you start to overlook things that might have seemed out of place early on. I thought that routine meant stability, but I was wrong. It started gradually. Anna began coming home a little later than usual. At first, it was just an hour or two here and there, and I didn't think much of it. We both had demanding jobs, and I knew how easy it was to get stuck in a late meeting or wrapped up in a last-minute project. But then, the late nights became more frequent. A couple of times a week, she'd be home long after her normal time. I didn't really notice at first, but once it became a pattern, I had to ask. One evening, I casually brought it up while we were eating dinner. "What's been keeping you at work so late?" I wasn't accusing her of anything, just curious. I still trusted her completely at that point. Her response seemed harmless enough. She explained that her team at work had started doing some team-building activities after hours. "We work long hours together," she said, "but we don't really know each other. So, a few of us decided to go out for drinks a couple of times a week. You know, just to relax and build rapport." It seemed reasonable to me. I knew how stressful her job could be, and if she needed to blow off some steam with her coworkers, I wasn't going to stand in her way. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We had been together for years, and I never had any reason to doubt her before. Besides, she still came home at night, maybe a little tipsy sometimes, but nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think much of it, and I went back to my work, believing everything was fine. But those late nights became a regular thing. And, over time, I started to notice small changes, things that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just her coming home late, it was the way she acted when she got home. She seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. And yet, I still didn't push her on it. I didn't want to be that overbearing husband who questioned every move his wife made. So, I let it go, convincing myself that it was just work stress. After all, I was busy with my own projects, and I didn't want to create drama where there didn't need to be any. But then, one night, everything changed. She came home late again, but this time, she was completely drunk. I'm talking stumbling through the door, slurring her words, and barely able to walk straight. Her clothes were a mess, her hair disheveled, and she didn't even seem to know where her purse was. This wasn't like her at all. She had always been the type to keep herself together, even after a few drinks. But that night, something was different. I helped her to the bedroom, trying to stay calm, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. As we were walking, I noticed something on the floor, near the doorway. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but when I bent down to pick it up, my stomach dropped. It was a used condom. I froze, holding that disgusting piece of evidence in my hand, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no other explanation. I looked at her, passed out on the bed, completely unaware of the bomb that had just gone off in my head. The late nights, the drinking, the weak excuses about team building suddenly clicked into place. She had been cheating on me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I stood there, staring at that condom in disbelief. How long had this been going on? Who was she with? Was it just one guy, or had this become a regular thing? My thoughts spiraled out of control as I stood there, frozen with rage and confusion. I wanted to wake her up and demand an explanation, but what could she possibly say that would make this any better? The proof was literally in my hand. I threw the condom on the floor, disgusted, and took a step back, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking. I've always prided myself on keeping my emotions in check, but at that moment, I felt like I was going to explode. How could she do this? After all the years we'd been together, after everything we'd built together, how could she betray me like this? I stormed out of the bedroom, trying to calm down, but the anger just kept building. All those nights she'd come home late, all those times she brushed me off with some half-baked excuse, I had believed her. I had trusted her completely. And this whole time, she had been sneaking around behind my back, treating me like a fool. I couldn't stand it. I paced around the house for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my head. The signs had been there, but I had been too blind to see them. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them. I had trusted her so much that I ignored all the red flags. And now, here I was, standing in my own home, with the undeniable proof of her infidelity lying on the floor. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed back into the bedroom, and before I even knew what I was doing, I was yelling at her. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, pointing to the condom still lying there on the floor. She stirred, groggy and confused, barely aware of what was happening. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" she slurred, still half drunk. "That." I pointed again, my voice shaking with anger. "A condom fell out of your pants. How do you explain that?" Her eyes widened as she finally registered what I was saying. But instead of looking guilty, she immediately went on the defensive. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" she yelled, her voice suddenly full of rage. "I would never cheat on you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The evidence was right there, and yet she was acting like I was the one in the wrong. Before I could say another word, she stumbled out of bed and came at me, fists swinging. "You think I'd do something like that after all these years?" she screamed, her punches wild and clumsy. I grabbed her wrists, trying to hold her back, but she was furious, her face red with anger. "You're out of your mind," she shouted, struggling to break free. "You don't know anything." It was unreal. Here I was, standing in the middle of our bedroom, holding the literal proof of her betrayal, and she was acting like the victim. Her punches were weak, more out of drunken frustration than anything else, but the fury behind them was real. I tried to calm her down, but she was too far gone. "Calm down," I yelled, trying to steady her. "Just look at what's on the floor. What's this? How do you explain it?" But she wasn't listening. She was too wrapped up in her own anger, too drunk to think straight. And then, in a split second, she broke free from my grip and rushed toward the kitchen. I didn't realize what she was doing until it was too late. She grabbed a knife. She stood there, clutching the knife in her trembling hand, her eyes wild and full of rage. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I'd spent years with, the one who always seemed so calm and in control. Now, here she was, drunk, furious, and waving a knife at me like she was ready to do something reckless. "You don't get to accuse me," she screamed, pointing the knife in my direction. Her hand was shaking, and I could see the crazed look in her eyes, a mix of fear and anger. "You don't get to tell me what I did or didn't do." For a moment, I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. How had it come to this? Just minutes ago, I was holding a used condom, and now my wife was standing in front of me with a knife in her hand. I took a slow step back, holding my hands up to show her I wasn't trying to escalate things. "Put the knife down," I said as calmly as I could, though my voice was tight with anger. "Let's just talk. We can figure this out." But she wasn't listening. She was too far gone, her emotions taking over completely. She took a shaky step toward me, the knife still raised, her voice trembling with fury. "You don't know anything about me," she shouted. "You think you can just accuse me like that? You don't know what I've been through." I kept my distance, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was boiling with rage. This was so far beyond anything I had ever expected from her. I thought I knew her, thought we had an understanding, but this? This was something else entirely. It wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about control, power, and how quickly everything can spiral out of control when the foundation of trust is shattered. I could feel my pulse racing as she stood there, her hands shaking and her face twisted with emotion. She took another step toward me, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this escalate any further. "Just put it down," I said again, my voice firmer this time. "You're not thinking straight." For a second, she seemed to hesitate. Her eyes flicked down to the knife, and I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. But then, just as quickly, the anger returned. She gripped the knife tighter, her knuckles white, and took another step toward me. "You don't get to walk away from this," she screamed. "You don't get to act like you're innocent in all of this." I was done playing her game. I reached down and grabbed the condom off the floor, my anger finally boiling over. I held it up, waving it in front of her. "You're going to stand there and tell me I don't know anything?" I shouted, my voice filled with raw, unfiltered rage. "This fell out of you. You can't explain this away." For a moment, the room went completely still. Her eyes locked on the condom in my hand, and I saw the truth hit her like a freight train. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor with a loud metallic sound. She just stood there, staring at it, as if the weight of her actions had finally crashed down on her. Her face drained of color, and I watched as she crumbled right in front of me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her whole body began to shake as the reality of what she'd done set in. She sank to the floor, her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she choked out between sobs. "It was the alcohol. It was a mistake." Her words were a mess, tumbling out in a desperate attempt to explain, to justify, but I wasn't having it. I stood there, seething, my fists clenched at my sides as I listened to her pathetic excuses. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disgust. "You're blaming the alcohol? Your friends? That's your excuse?" She sobbed harder, shaking her head as if she could somehow undo the damage she'd caused. "Please. I wasn't thinking. I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing." I cut her off, my voice sharp and filled with fury. "You didn't know what you were doing? That's supposed to make this better? You think I'm just going to forgive you because you were drunk?" She continued to cry, her body shaking as she crumpled into a pathetic heap on the floor. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Her tears meant nothing to me now. All the trust, the respect, everything we had built, it was gone. I watched her on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, but there was no sympathy left in me. I had given her everything, trust, respect, space, and she had thrown it all away. I stood there, my fists clenched, trying to control the storm of anger boiling inside me. "You didn't just make a mistake," I said coldly, staring down at her pathetic figure. "You made a choice. You chose to go out, to get drunk, and to sleep with someone else. Don't sit here crying, acting like you're the victim. You did this." Her sobs only grew louder as she rocked back and forth, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she kept repeating, as if saying it over and over would somehow undo the damage she had caused. But it was too late. There was no coming back from this. I couldn't stand to be in the room with her anymore. Every second I stayed, the rage inside me grew stronger. Without another word, I turned and walked out, heading straight to the closet. I yanked open the doors, ripping her clothes from the hangers and throwing them onto the floor. Everything she owned, every piece of her life that had been intertwined with mine, was suddenly tainted, and I wanted it out of my sight. I grabbed her favorite sweater, the one she always wore on our date nights, and without hesitation, I flung it out the window. It fluttered down onto the street below, a symbol of everything I was about to destroy. I wasn't thinking straight, but I didn't care. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. She came stumbling into the room, her face still wet with tears, eyes wide with panic as she realized what I was doing. "What are you doing?" she screamed, rushing over to try to stop me. "You can't just throw my things out. This is insane." "Insane?" I shot back, my voice full of contempt. "What's insane is that you thought you could screw around behind my back and then come home like nothing happened." I continued pulling clothes from the closet, throwing them out the window one by one. Every item felt like a piece of her betrayal, and getting rid of it made me feel like I was taking control of something, anything, in the chaos she had created. "You've lost your mind," she yelled, grabbing at my arm, but I shrugged her off easily, my anger giving me strength. "This won't fix anything." I spun around, glaring at her. "You think I'm trying to fix something?" I spat. "There's nothing to fix. You ruined it." I grabbed more clothes, more shoes, more memories of the life we once shared, and tossed them out, too. With each item that landed on the street below, I felt a strange sense of liberation. But it was also hollow. No matter how much I threw away, the betrayal would still be there, looming over me. She broke down completely then, collapsing onto the floor as I finished emptying the closet. "Please, stop," she begged, her voice barely a whisper. "We can work this out. We have to. We're married. We can't just end it like this." I looked at her, the woman I once loved, now reduced to a sobbing mess on the floor, and I felt nothing but disgust. "Forget it," I said, my voice cold. "You expect me to just pretend like none of this happened? That you didn't come home with a condom falling out of your pants? That you didn't pull a knife on me?" She reached for me, desperate, but I stepped back, not wanting her to touch me. "I love you," she cried, her words choked by sobs. "I didn't mean any of it. The knife, the shouting. I wasn't thinking. I don't know why I did it." "You love me," I scoffed. "Is that what you call this? You didn't seem to love me when you were screwing some other guy." Her face crumpled as the weight of my words hit her. She shook her head, trying to explain. "It wasn't like that. It was just one night. A mistake. One night. One mistake." I repeated bitterly, my anger flaring again. "You think I'm supposed to just forget that you cheated on me, that you tried to stab me in a drunken rage?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Please, We're married. You can't just throw me out like this. I pointed to the door, my voice steady and resolute. Get out. We're done. She shook her head, refusing to accept it. You can't mean that. We've been together for so long. We can fix this. We have to. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly, my words final. And when it's over, I don't want to see you again. You've destroyed everything. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at me, her world crumbling around her. Then, slowly, she got up and walked to the door. She didn't look back. I watched her go, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over. The divorce went through quickly. We didn't have kids, and we didn't own much together, so there wasn't much to fight over. I kept the house, she moved out of town, and that was the last I ever saw of her. I didn't follow her life after that. Some mutual friends tried to fill me in, but I shut it down. I didn't want to know. It was over, and I had no interest in hearing about what she was doing or how she was moving on. I threw myself into work, trying to forget everything. The house felt empty, but it was also liberating. I didn't have to look at her things, didn't have to pretend anymore. The silence was hard at first, but I filled it with the hum of my computer, the tapping of the keyboard. Eventually, it got easier. Looking back, the divorce was a turning point. It forced me to rebuild my life from the ground up, but I did it on my own terms. There were moments of bitterness, of course, but they passed. I became stronger, more focused, less willing to compromise on the things that mattered to me. In the end, I learned that trust, once broken, can't always be repaired. And sometimes, the only way forward is to let go completely. Life moves on, and so did I. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.